The world is an extremely mysterious place. It is like a giant dark ocean that hides many secrets within its depths. Within those depths, for example, there is an infinite variety of life, most of which, contrary to what science would tell us, exists completely outside of humanity's purview. Besides being an infinitely mysterious place, this world is also a predatory world. It is generally the case that one life form will need to consume some or all of another life form in order to survive. In our modern society, vampires have become a very powerful archetype for the hidden predatory life that exists outside the purview of man. I find this very fitting, because it is my opinion that no other creature bridges the gap between man and that predatory darkness better than the vampire. One large reason why I believe that a vampire is the perfect archetype of that vast darkness all around us is because the vampire is considered a fictional creature by mainstream society. It is the case then that when we see a vampire in the movies, we dismiss such creatures as pure fantasy, which allows us to enjoy our books and movies without distress. And when we see or hear about people that like to dress up and act like real vampires, most people tell themselves that all of this is the result of delusion and too much free time. Similarly, when authors or occult practitioners speak about the epic forces that surround humanity, about the sentience of these great forces, and about the fact that such forces are predatory, most people dismiss such talk as fantasy, which makes life far more enjoyable and easier to tolerate. But the truth is that we humans are mere specks floating around a mere speck of a planet that circles the outer edge of a tiny galaxy, in a dark cosmos that is so big that we can't even begin to ponder its volume. And within that unfathomable space, there are things that are so vast and indifferent to us, that humanity, and the science that it practices, cannot begin to deal with it in any other way than to ignore it, and call it the stuff of overactive imaginations. Perhaps the best that we have done, the best that we can do, within the mainstream of our shared human society, is to create a small little window into that outer darkness, one that allows us to take a quick peek every once in a while, but one that is not too large, so that we are able to easily restrain our collective fears of the dark unknown. A wonderful representative of that window, which most dismiss as fantasy and pseudoscience, is the vampire. If for a moment, we are able to look into the vampire myth with an open mind, and ponder the possibility that within this vast and unknown universe, it might be possible that the vampire could be real, what might we find? We could begin with a general definition of the vampire mythos, because it provides a wonderful encapsulation of the greater reality that faces all humans on this planet, and it hints at the potential within us all, if we are willing to embrace the reality of this darkness that surrounds us. The vampire mythos tells us that the vampire protagonist, or antagonist, is generally born a regular human, and that through some dark necromantic alchemy, this human is turned into an undead creature of great power, that needs to feed on the living. A vampire then is a human being that has embraced, or has been impelled to embrace the darkness. As a result of this dark embrace, he or she gains great power, which he or she usually uses for rather mundane human affairs. But as we, along with this tragic vampiric hero or villain, contemplate the immortality that this creature now possesses, we begin to contemplate the possibilities available to a being that in many ways has left the human world far behind. Indeed, this enduring myth of the tragic vampire has overtaken popular Western culture like a slow storm. There are many books and movies written about vampires, both fiction and non-fiction, and as a result, social media and our social spheres are full of vampire references and even vampire clubs and groups. These vampire groups have actually become incredibly popular in the last few decades, with many people joining vampire houses, or covens, because they are either interested in the vampire mythos, or because they truly believe that they are vampires themselves. As the subculture has expanded, those people that believe that they are vampires tend to have many different beliefs about what a vampire is, and how he or she should go about exercising his or her vampire persona. Generally speaking, these modern groups believe that a vampire is a human being who, for one reason or another, has the need to feed on other people, in order to acquire a vital energetic substance that he or she is not able to produce naturally. Such practicing vampires believe that there are three basic methods to acquire this energy. The first is through the ingestion of a small bit of blood. The second method is through the ingestion of psychic life force. And the third method is the ingestion of psychic energy, through the sexual act. As a result of this incredible growth in all things vampire, and because of all of the individuals that are now coming out of the coffin as it were, proclaiming or discovering that they are vampires, there have been a number of great alterations in the vampire mythos, in essence altering what a vampire is, or can be. Interestingly, at least to me, this taking over of the vampire mythos by self-proclaimed human vampires has actually enhanced our understanding of what the real truth behind the vampire legend is. I imagine that there are two major reasons for this. The first is that we are now using modern language and ideas to explain realities that were once only being expressed using archaic and medieval language and conceptions. Instead of blind fear and superstition, we are now quite openly looking at and talking about something that defies easy explanation. Instead of using simplistic and prejudiced terms and concepts to try and explain something that was once considered offensive or off-limits, we are now developing clearer, more complex, and open-minded concepts in order to answer occult questions. The second reason that I believe that this new vampiric blossoming has helped us to understand the true reality of what the vampire really is that human beings are far more intuitive and capable than most would imagine. When a large collective of human minds is focused in one direction, it can mean that a certain energetic wave has been activated, and such a collective pooling of human attention can uncover hidden truths. It can also allow some to begin to develop new talents and abilities. I am grateful for this energetic wave and for this continually developing vampire culture. Within their ranks I see many kindred spirits. Now, I cannot speak about the many beliefs that the vampires within these groups might have about the reality of vampires. All I can do is share what I have been able to discover about the vampire through my own investigations and travels. To start off, from what I have been able to discover, the biological human vampire does not seem to exist. What I mean by this is that, aside from vampire bats and a few other biological life forms that do indeed ingest blood in order to sustain life, the biological human vampire does not seem to exist. There are, to my knowledge, no sentient flesh and blood creatures out there with some special gland or organ that allows them to ingest blood in order to live forever. Certainly there are human beings out there that do like to wear fangs, and that do like to drink blood because they believe that this will prolong their lives, or because it is necessary for them in some way, but actual flesh and blood vampires, like in the Strain novels for example, don't seem to exist. I at least have never run across a true biological vampire in any of my investigations or travels on this earth, and I suspect that if such creatures are real, they must be very good at staying hidden, or must be very few in number. That being said, I have discovered that vampires do in fact exist, and some of them are indeed flesh and blood creatures. In order for what I have said to make sense, I must make the distinction that the real vampires of which I speak do not need blood in order to sustain life, and to escape death's final trap and become immortal. This again does not mean that the spilling of blood, and the token ingestion of some of this blood, does not exist within the true vampire's customs and rituals. It just means that blood, biological plasma, is not a critical aspect of vampirism. All real vampires then, as far as I have been able to discover through my personal investigations, are psychic vampires. Even those that find it absolutely necessary to ingest blood, are in actuality psychic vampires, that are predominantly only able to ingest this energetic life force, through the blood ritual. What I am saying, is that all real vampires, that is, all vampires that truly exist within this realm, or that can travel in and out of it, are in essence creatures that survive by ingesting the psychic life force of other creatures. These creatures can be said to be predatory in that they consume the life of others in order to survive. Many living beings on this earth can be said to be predatory. Humans, for example, are predatory beings, because they too need to ingest other living things in order to survive. Vampires, though, are creatures that have been able to finely hone their digestive processes, so that they are able to consume the true essence of all life. Within the human spectrum, these psychic vampires vary in their need for actual material food. Most of the human vampires that you see in the popular clubs, and in covens, are people that need to eat as much as anyone, but that use that extra energy that they get from vampiric feeding, to overcome an energetic lack in themselves. If such vampires are able to enhance their abilities over time, they can sometimes change, and become beings that end up requiring less and less actual food to stay alive. These enhanced human vampires, like certain Indian yogis, are able to survive without the need for so much physical food, until there comes a time when such vampires require little, or no food at all. Once this stage in development is achieved, I find that it is better to refer to such creatures as alchemists, instead of vampires, because they have developed the ability to transmute certain life energies within their own beings. And like all true alchemists, the final challenge left for such beings is to develop a continuous self-awareness that is able to endure physical death. While the existence of such vampires and alchemists might seem astounding, in my opinion the truly astounding thing is that, within the realm of the psychic life force ingesting vampire, there are two fundamental varieties. The first is the flesh and blood human vampire or alchemist. The second is a truly astounding creature, a creature that is non-organic in its composition. Firstly, as I have mentioned, there truly are on this planet human beings that have the ability to drain the psychic life force from another person, and can use that force in order to enhance their own life. And there are even those that can further refine this life force that they have ingested, so that they are able to greatly prolong their earthly existence, and that can, through great struggle, eventually even cheat death altogether. And if that is not amazing enough, there is a far older vampire life form that has been on this planet for millennia. What is really incredible about this older and far more powerful vampiric life form, is that it is not flesh and blood. The best name, in my opinion, for these creatures is non-organic predatory beings. I call them this because they are creatures that do not have flesh and blood bodies, and yet they are nevertheless alive and aware beings. Besides being inorganic, these creatures are predatory in nature. What I mean by this, is that they survive by consuming the life force of other creatures, most often biological creatures, that is creatures that are made up of flesh and blood, like you and me. My research has shown me that it was the non-organic predatory beings that were the first vampires on this earth, and that they were the catalyst that created human vampires. The first human vampires, who could more accurately be called priests, witch doctors, sorcerers or alchemists, either through direct interaction with, or through meticulous observation of, non-organic predatory beings, found out how to consume psychic life force, and how to use this life force to increase health, awareness, and longevity. Eventually these practices by human alchemists allowed them to cheat death. It is the case then that the entirety of the vampire mythos originates from either these non-organic predatory beings interacting with the human population, or as a result of regular people interacting with these ancient human alchemists, who stole the secrets of immortality from non-organic beings. How these inorganic creatures interacted with humanity in the past, and how it was that certain human beings could learn to consume life force as these creatures did, and do, can be explained in a general mythic pattern that is consistent throughout the whole of the planet. Generally, non-organic beings, either predatory in nature or not, were worshipped by ancient people as gods. This is a complex topic that would require its own video to explain in any decent detail. Suffice it to say that many of the ancient gods, and many of the effects attributed to modern gods, are the result of non-organic beings interacting with people. Simply, the old gods are not dead, they move among us still. They have not changed, it is man that has changed. It is modern man that can no longer see them, and it is modern man, through his rational stance, that can no longer even see the very real effects that these non-organic beings can create. Proof of the power of these non-organics can still be found on this planet, if you are willing to look far enough. The proof of inorganic interaction with humans can be seen in voodoo ceremonies, in spirit possessions, in shamanic rites, in some poltergeist activity, in some spirit channeling, and even in some of the extraterrestrial encounters that people report with such frequency. When these non-organic beings, that were worshipped as gods, were of a predatory nature, these entities would often demand sacrifice of one kind or another. This sacrifice most often involved the killing of organic life, that is, the blood of a living creature would be spilled over sacred altars, in order to please the many deities that were worshipped. In our modern times, most people believe, and rightly so, that blood is the liquid that keeps us all alive. Basically, when we are drained of it, we perish. These are modern rational ideas based on scientific understanding. But no matter how hard some of us try, we still seem to know that when this blood is not just randomly spilled, but actually given to another being or entity, this blood takes on a sacred quality. Then an instinctual component of man screams at him, telling him that the blood of life is sacred, that it is part of the life-giving force that holds the energy of the human soul itself. Perhaps this instinctual knowledge is present, because our ancient forefathers spilled so much blood to these ancient gods, or perhaps it is still with us, because the average man is able to somehow intuit the true significance of these blood rites. Nevertheless, the average person, even in those far-gone days, saw these sacrifices as an act of allegiance to the gods, but the priests often knew better. They knew that this was quite literally food for the gods. Whether it was seen as devotion or food for the gods, all hoped that through these sacrifices, the gods would grant their wishes and provide general prosperity. What a very select group of priests uncovered, however, through untold years of meticulous study, was that what these gods were really after was not the blood itself, but the life force that was projected by those that were partaking in these rituals, and the great torrents of life force that was projected by those dying on the altars. What this means is that these non-organic predatory beings were interested in the life force that came from these sacrificial events. They were not interested in the blood. The blood was just a symbol or representation of this life force, and to the average person, seeing the blood on the sacred stone was the perfect symbol for the gods' desires being satisfied. In reality, what the gods really wanted was psychic life force. After that monumental discovery, it was only a matter of time, albeit a very long time of meticulous research, until these priests were able to replicate the vampiric techniques of these non-organic predatory life forms. Such priests then devoted their entire lives in the pursuit of this life force. They created great ruling houses, and working in tandem, were eventually able to manipulate their own awareness in infinite ways. During this quest for power that lasted for thousands of years, they were to face great upheaval, as one civilization came and others left. Eventually these ancient alchemists all but died out, as their own arrogance allowed them to fall at the hands of the many new human empires that grew around them. There are tales that some of these ancient alchemists are still around, living seemingly immortal lives in the fringes of human awareness. These ancient alchemists, like their non-organic predatory masters, have become a type of non-organic life form themselves, and consume, when they can get it, a very special form of life force that has allowed them to live for thousands of years. So yes, according to my investigations, vampires are very real. Thanks to a very large energetic wave and a confluence of human attention, certain human beings are awakening to the once hidden power of the vampire. Their dabbling is still for the most part at a fledgling level, but who knows what the future holds for them. And yes, the most powerful vampires are still among us. These are those ancient non-organic beings, who were and still are, worshipped as gods. And within their ranks, one can now also find those ancient alchemists that have managed to cheat death and become non-organic beings themselves. Of these non-organic creatures, one could say that their power is growing at a geometric rate, as the human population increases more and more. But what if all of this sounds too much like the many fiction vampire stories that have become so popular at this time? How can you discover the proof of the existence of vampires yourself? Well, you could go to one of the places where human vampires gather, one of their covens, or perhaps to a vampire ball, and see for yourself what you might discover there. If you are able to look with an open mind at the many startling exploits that are being performed there, hidden beneath all the fake fangs and Victorian dress, I think that you will be greatly surprised by your discoveries. But what about non-organic vampires? How do you find the proof of their existence for yourself? Well, in some ways this is actually an easier thing to investigate, as long as you are willing to look at the world in a truly detached way. To find them, you need to look deeply into human history, and ask yourself why there is so much struggle, suffering, and war, in a world that is able to easily provide everything that a human being needs. You must use this detached vision to try and discover why, even though we humans have now advanced technologically by leaps and bounds, we still can't seem to grow at all spiritually. You must try and discover why, even though we now possess enough technological prowess to create anything that we could ever want, people still struggle and suffer all over the world. If you are really courageous, you could also try and take part in a voodoo ceremony, or find and listen to those that have reported being abducted by extraterrestrials. I don't mean watch videos, I mean actually go and do these things yourself, and see what you can discover. Finally, you could wait until the sun goes down, turn off all the lights in your house, and with an open mind, try to feel the darkness all around you. And as you feel the dark embrace, ask the inner part of you what it feels. If you are lucky, you will see the shadows out of the corners of your eyes. And a part deep inside you will know that you are not alone in this darkness.